So what I've gone and done is measure down and across where I want the centre of this little window to be. I'll put this front on. What a beautiful fit. Oh lovely. There we are. Here's the little window that I want to use. Oh, I can focus, yeah. Which is very useful. It's nice. It's sort of burnished in a nice way. So I need to drill a hole in here in the right point, put that in, and then cut out the dozens of layers and filters and things that end up turning it into a nice moving gear effect. Now the hole I need actually measures 21.5 millimeters, and as I haven't got a 21.5 millimeter drill bit, I think I'm going to use my laser drill. Yeah. Got a front row seat. Hopefully it'll go right, but equally you'll see if it doesn't. Let's press start. Not bad. I think that will be fine. Right, it's the next day and it's all set. So we've got that stuck on the back and that from the front. So let's put it into place and see what happens. Time for some illumination. I need to illuminate the machine inside here so it's clearly visible. I've got two choices really, both using LED lighting. There's this sort, which I think is called a cob LED because it's mounted on a printed circuit board. Incredibly bright, quite widespread, and because it's such an intense small point of light you get nice shadows. The other sort are these strips of LED, self-adhesive strip with loads and loads of LEDs on them. When you switch them on, you can see you get a far more general light, which can be very useful. Having almost blinded myself and now being able to see loads of blue smudges wherever I look, I am erring on the side of these little cob LEDs, if that's what they're called, the single ones, because they produce such nice shadows. I'm just rigging up a couple of these single LEDs, one either side, inside the front panel, angled just temporarily with a bit of blue tack. And I thought, oh, I wonder if my dear viewers would like to know, if that's not really obvious, how you can tidy up 3 separate strands of wire. So hold them where you don't want them to over tighten them a little bit, and there you have it. These 3-watt LEDs are also very useful because they produce a lot of heat, obviously being 3 watts, so they're mounted on a piece of metallized printed circuit board to take some of the heat, to dissipate the heat. You can switch these LEDs on and off using the very small amount of electricity that an Arduino can provide, and the little transistor does the actual switching and the control. Now I'm going to connect this, because I want to fade it up and down, to one of the PWM, which is Pulse Width Modulation outputs from the Arduino. So here are the pins on one side of the Arduino, and I'm using pin 5. You can see several of them, 3, 5, 6, 9, 10 and 11 have little squiggly lines by them. That means that they're all PWM outputs. The fabulous thing about the Arduino is you can decide what you want the pins to be. They can be inputs, they can be outputs, they can be pulse width outputs, if you want, all sorts of things. And further to that, on this side of the Arduino, there are the A pins, and these are analog pins that you can use to measure voltages. So that's just fabulous. It's so versatile, it's wonderful. This is the code that runs Florence that's loaded into the Arduino. It always starts with a setup, and this is where you tell the pins what you want them to be and how you want them to act. So these 4, A0, A1, A2, A3, I've said I want them to be outputs. Then you've got number 8, I want it to be an input, and I want it to have an internal resistor to pull it up to positive, so I can connect switches to it that have to pull it down. It's just a better way of doing it. And that's what you do. Now I've added one here, which is pin mode number 7 output. I've written a couple of very simple little bits of code here to fade the LEDs up and down. What they do is you have a for loop. 4 things are brilliant for loops. You say, okay, this is a for loop, here's the information. I've got an integer, it's a whole number, called I, which starts off as 0. It's going to keep going round and while I is smaller or equal to 200, and each time it goes round it's going to add 1 to I. You could change that and have I plus 2 if you wanted. And then it's going to go analog right to pin 5, I, so whatever value this currently is at, and it's going to delay 10 milliseconds, otherwise it will just do it instantly and you won't see any fading. Then it reaches the end of the for loop and goes back again. Checks whether it's smaller than 200. If it is, carry on. Goes round and round and round. When it finally is larger than 200, it then leaves, the program leaves this for loop. I thought it would be interesting to explain in a little bit more detail what's meant by pulse width modulation, or PWM. These, you can see the 2 LEDs are fading up and down still, with those 2 for loops that I wrote on the Arduino. What I've done is I've connected my oscilloscope. You can see it's producing, the Arduino's producing loads and loads of pulses, about 2,000 every second. If I slow the scan rate down, or whatever it is, it's so long since I've used a an oscilloscope. Right, there we are, we can actually see 2 of the pulses there. And you can see what's happening. When the Arduino is told to send 0 to its output pin, which it will do in a minute, this is 1 pulse, all of the output is off all the time. As the number increases, that will be 128 halfway along, then it goes to 255 when it's on all of the wave. So dear viewer, on today's video I want to show how to turn one of these beautiful footlight lampshades into a printed, 3D printed smaller version by making every mistake under the sun, not reading the instructions, learning loads through the process, and hopefully helping my dear viewers to avoid making the same mistake, although I'm sure that they would be sensible enough to read some of the instructions before starting. So we've moved outside. I've got a nice big sheet of cardboard, it's pretty neutral in colour. So I'm going to take the photos now with a nice long depth of field set on the camera. This is the first step. I put the photos into the computer, into the software, and it's now running through them all, trying to look for points to match up to enable it to work out where each photo was taken in space. We'll see how it gets on. So after a few minutes, this is what it's come up with. The blue planes represent each of the photos, and there's something you can, oh yeah, look, there's a vague, zoom, very vague few spots representing the lampshade. So the next bit takes far longer. Unfortunately, the software didn't manage to extract all the 3D data necessary from the inside of the clamshell light. So what I'm going to have to do is turn it over, and I said before, it's far too shiny. I definitely won't work with this. So I'm going to spray it with some metal primer. Not that it's crowded in here or anything, but I've managed to clear a little space by piling things on top of other things. And I've sat the sprayed clamshell lampshade on a couple of spaces underneath, so it's slightly higher, so hopefully the software will be able to distinguish fine the edges. So that was a complete failure. Only 2 of, I don't know, 50 odd photos actually were registered as being okay by the software. I don't think there's enough positions on this being smooth and grey for the software or the camera to be able to focus on. 10 minutes and a couple of Sharpies later, I've achieved this. Oh, I'm so proud. It's a lovely bit of colouring. Now I have absolutely no idea whether this is going to work, but it's worth a try. I can always spray over it. What a mess. That's a ruin of a really beautiful antique clamshell lampshade. Still, mustn't grumble. Well, all the photos were accepted by the software, which is great, but there still isn't enough information for it to properly construct the lampshade, so I need to try something else. I went and bought some textured Rust-Oleum paint. This was called, oh, there we are, Desert Bisque. And 2 or 3 coats later, you can see it actually, if I zoom in a bit, it gives a really nice mottled, textured finish. And it's covered everything, all the scribbles that I did, really well. I'm going to try taking it outside, as that's what's recommended. Nice cloudy day, so quite diffuse lighting. I also changed the camera settings to save the images in RAW format, which is huge, about 25 megabytes per picture, rather than about 9 megabytes. And then I used some software from Pixillion to convert them into TIFF data that the photogrammetry software recommended. That way all of the minute details with the speckled paint will be picked up by the software, and there won't be any risk that compressing it to JPEGs will spoil that. And this is the result. It's absolutely amazing. A perfect 3D scan. Now to go ahead and 3D print them. These have now printed out, and they are sitting on the raft that the 3D printer prints on the bed of the machine. So there you can see the grid that it's very cleverly built in the centre, constructed. It's even left gaps around where it thinks the sides are vertical enough to be able to support the building up of the levels, but in the middle it's constructed this really nice fine lattice work. So I want to try one of the 5 examples. I found that it's amazing, absolutely amazing. Look at that. No difficult trimming or anything else. Brilliant. Basically, you can see there's the 2 little whatever I called them, and oops-a-daisy, there's the screw hole in the base and the wire for the wires to go through, and then that will screw into there. I'll hold that off because these get very hot, so I wanted to leave plenty of airflow around the back. Next thing to do is to tidy it up a little bit and then spray it. And what I did during the meanwhilest as well is on Florence's home, I've marked out and drilled and fitted a wire or wires into the 2 positions where the lampshades are going to go, and I've also wired all them in to a spare pulse width modulation pin on the Arduino. I've got the 2 little lamps mounted, and I am so pleased with their appearance. They look absolutely lovely, and the amazing thing is I can now it's on file, scanned in, I can print them any size I want. Them inside are the little LEDs mounted, and I'm so pleased I've got them so deep because you can't see the end of the LED lamp really at all, which is great, so it won't blind you. So got that done, and now I need to add the other lamps to this set lamps function so that they can fade up after each other or down together or whatever.